This is our first class, so I would rather make it clear how I teach, because it's very, very clear to have a conversation between us that clears what the points that I want you guys to follow in my class. First thing, because it's online, I do not want to feel like I'm teaching the walls. So try and understand that, and please try and connect. Try and talk as much as you can. I would prefer that you turn your mics on while speaking to me, because obviously I can read the chats, but having an interactive class where you're talking to me would be very, very better. So every time that you have a question regarding whatever I'm teaching, you guys can always tell me in the middle of the class too, although we're always going to have a lecture separately for your revision and doubt sessions, but still prefer talking about the session or your doubts right here, so that I can clear it right at this point, because if that gaps happen, it's going to be a little difficult for me to try and understand what you're trying to say. And vice versa, you would have a problem with me trying to say the same point again in the next class. So make it as interactive as you can. You guys can talk, you guys can put your points on. If you want, you have a point that you guys want to tell me, I will always be open to your conversations. So the first lecture is going to be about your cell structure and transport. Because this is a crash course, I would rather focus on points which are very, very important for your exam point of view, rather than trying to focus on the entire syllabus altogether. So although we'll cover the entire syllabus for sure, but let's put more focus on the points that are important, the one that is having more weightage, and the others, let's go through them so that you understand the concepts of them. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, so let's start with the objectives of this lecture. Starting with the first point, we're trying to understand what microscopes are. Before diving into the topic of understanding how cell structure and the transport works, we need to understand how are we able to see cells. Because I am sure you might have all seen blood once or twice in your life. And even if you touch blood and you try to rub it, you don't feel any type of grain structures. Which means cells are so small that you can't even feel them when you're trying to rub blood on your skin. So that apparently means we need to have a different kind of instrument to actually look into your cells. So understanding microscopes is very, very important before trying to understand what cells are. Then there are certain technicalities that you need to understand about the topic of microscope. The first one is going to be about the magnification. How do you control magnification? For example, there are tests for your cell counts. In those type of tests, there is no need to see what inside of the cell looks like. For that, you just need to count the cells. For example, your hemoglobin. For hemoglobin, you need to have a count of RBCs. So when you're talking about how much hemoglobin a person has, there's only count of the RBCs done, and then you can calculate the hemoglobin. So for that, you need to adjust your resolution and the magnification of the point, so that you can only count the cells, but sometimes we need to look inside the cell, then the magnification would have to be increased. And then at last we're going to understand how do you understand that this cell is this small, and how do you calculate it in real life, because everything that you're watching is under a microscope. So either it is going to be on a screen right in front of you, or it is going to be below the lens. So you need to understand how to calculate the real size of the image. Now, there are certain units that we use while talking about your cells, because cells are very, very small, and they are usually in terms of micrometers, so units are important. So let's start with the first, which is your kilometer. It is written as km, and that is 1000 meters. So everything for meter is like the SI unit. So we take meter in the middle, and then we try to calculate what is more than meter and what is less than meter. Then 1 meter has 100 centimeters, while 1 centimeter has 10 millimeters. 1 millimeter is going to go to 1000 micrometers, and 1 micrometer is going to be 1000 nanometers. Now you see there are different measurements here. This is micro. This is also known as mu, as you say. The alphabet is known as mu, but we call it as micro because we're trying to understand the units. Now, there's an easy way to learn this. You do not have to cram this entire thing up. Rather than cramming this up, you can use this table. The table, like I said, the SI unit is always meters. So meter is kept in the middle, right here. And according to this, Either you have to move to the left or you have to move to the right. According to that, you can calculate the units. For example, if you're moving to your left, every time that you move one box left, you're going to multiply the unit with 10. So if you move from meter to decameter, it is going to be into 10, so that is 10 meter. Then you move from decameter to hecto, it is going to be 2 jumps from meter, that is why it is 100 meter. Then you make the third jump to kilometer, so 1 kilometer is 1000 meters. So this is how you calculate to the left. When you're moving to the right, you divide it by 10. So from meter, you're moving to decimeter, divided by 10, so it is going to be 0.1 meter. If you move another jump, another one to the left, right, you're going to have it 0.01 meter, which is your centimeter. Then you're going to go millimeter. After millimeters, this is millimeters is your 1 by 1000. Then if you want to go to micrometer, it is going to be 1 by a million. And then there is nano, which is 10 to the power 9. So when it moves upwards, it is going to be into 10 raised to power minus 9 meter. So for say you're calculating, let me take an example. Imagine you're calculating what 2 meter is in nanometer. So how do you find that? So nanometer, I said, is 10 raised to power minus 9. So one thing that you always have to do is 2 into 10 raised to power minus 9 nanometer. Sorry, it's the opposite. Yeah. So this is how you calculate. In 2 meters, how many nanometers are going to be there? They're going to be 2 into 10 raised to power minus 9 nanometers. So this is how you calculate. The table is always going to help you. It would, it would make your effort a little easier. You would not have to cram this table up. Instead, what you can do is, you cram this up. Kilometer, hectometer, then deca, then meter, deci, centi, milli, micro, nano. So this is how you can learn the order. Once the order is learned, the calculation would be easier. Now moving to why do you need microscopes. Already I've told you the point of having microscopes, because all the organisms are made up of cell, and cell is a very, very small thing that we can't look for under the naked eye. So we need to have an instrument for that, which is your microscopes. This is how a microscope looks like. And if you see, this is how blood looks like to us. And even if you feel this blood, there's no grains present in the blood. But if you look at this same blood spot under the microscope, you'll be able to see cells. Maybe not what is inside the cell, but at least the boundaries of the cell. Then what is the history? How do you see microscopes, and what are the points of microscope? So the first microscope that ever came into existence was in mid-17th century, and that microscope was the simplest kind of microscope. What is the simplest kind of zooming thing that you can all see? It's a very, very simple thing. Do you guys know about it? It's a hand instrument that you can use to magnify things. Yeah, so the magnifying glass is the simplest type of microscope that we have. But microscope, if we talk about microscope, we're trying to look beyond what a magnifying glass can. So magnifying glass is a part of a microscope, but it's not exactly a microscope. So what is going to be the simplest kind of microscope? It is the light microscope. We're going to throw light on whatever we're trying to look at, and if we're able to see the boundaries of it, that is the maximum a light microscope can let us see. So they use a beam of light to form an image of an object, and it can magnify it up to 2000 times. This is what a light microscope would be able to give you at max of it. This is like the max power a light microscope has. And if you're looking at a light microscope simply without any extra magnification, you're going to look at cells like these. That's it. That's all that you will be able to see. The nucleus will be darkly stained, and the other parts would be transparent except the boundary. You would be able to see the boundary, which will be lighter in color, but you would still be able to distinguish the boundaries of the cell. Now coming to the parts of the microscope, which are very, very important. This is your eyepiece, and as the word says, eyepiece. So this is from where you're going to look at the microscope. This is your objective lens. This is the first kind of lens that would come in contact with the object that you're trying to look at. For example, if we're talking about cells, blood is the simplest kind of thing that you can look for. So for example, your stage, which is right below your objective lens, has blood. So if you look at the from the eyepiece, it is going to have double magnification, first from the objective lens, then a little changes from your eyepiece lens. Right below your stage is going to be the light source. There are two types of light sources. First is going to be a light source as in a torch. A torch light, there's going to be a bulb in it, and you turn that on and you can see. The second type that is present is a mirror. So you tilt that mirror from wherever the light is coming, and that reflects on the stage, and then you can see. So whatever type of complexity of the microscope you have, you're going to have different kind of light source. Then there are focusing wheels. There's one fine focusing wheel and the other is coarse focusing wheel. These are both for two things. First, to adjust this part. This entire part, where do you want that lens? If you want a little below it or your eye level, or a little above according to the person's height. The second one is going to be if you want to move the slide. For example, my hand has blood on it. You're able to see blood, but you're seeing the boundary of it. You're not able to see the entire. And if, for say, you're trying to count the number of cells, so you would have to move that entire sample to see how much cells are present on it. So for that, you can move these, both of these focusing wheels, so that the entire plate or your stage can rotate according to your comfort level. Then coming to your electron microscope, these are like high power. These are able to see everything that is inside the cell. These came, the first invention was in 1930, and they allowed the scientists to see subcellular structures of the cell. This is how a cell looks like under an electron microscope, although there's no word as under electron microscope, because an electron microscope gives you a picture. So there's an entire setup of laptops and your computers attached to your electron microscope. So you just get a generated photo out of it, and then you can see it. There's no eyepiece lens to look into your electron microscope. They use beam of electrons to form an image. So I think you guys must have seen X-rays once in your life. Do you guys know what an X-ray looks like?
Yes.
So X-ray is also, okay. So X-ray is also beam of a lot of particles on a structure, which is your bone, and from wherever they come back is the structure that you'll be able to see. Similarly, here also, for example, this is my cell. There are electrons thrown into the structure, and whatever comes back lets you see the image that is there. So this can magnify up to 2 million times, and highly magnified 2D image is formed. We're specifying a 2D image because there's one another type of microscope, specifically electron microscope, that is able to give out 3D images. And the resolution of the images are very, very good. Although I know you guys are Gen Z, so I think you would know what great resolution is. But for the people who do not know, resolution is when your pixels are not, letting the picture go vague. So if the pixels are too close, you'll be able to see a clearer image. So that is a high resolution image. Now, this is how an electron microscope looks like. Like I said, there's an entire setup with your microscope. This is the setup of the microscope, and this is where you're going to get your picture. So there are certain issues with having an electron microscope. First is that it's large, so you would have to have a room for it. Second is it's super expensive. I mean, you can see the setup. It's huge, and it is, because it is a certain, kind of your setup, it is large, so you would have to have a room. And it is expensive because of the type of parts that are involved. The third thing, which is very, very important, is the temperature, the humidity, the pressure in the room, everything would have to be controlled. So whatever high-tech movie that you can think of, there's a room that has a panel, and that panel has, set up for what amount of temperature is going to be there, what is the pressure and the humidity in the environment of the electron microscope. If that changes, your images will not come out as they were supposed to, or maybe the electron microscope, the entire setup would shut down. So that is something that you have to make sure. Then coming to the next type of electron microscope, like I said, it would be able to give you 3D images. Such a microscope is known as scanning microscope, and this is how you can see. You can also look at the depth of the cell. So not just the structures that are present in the cell, but also the depth. And you can also see the chromosome structures inside the cell, which are actually inside the nucleus. So this is how much you can zoom into it. Although it shows a 3D image, the magnification power is lower, and the resolution is also a little bit lower than that of an electron microscope. Because if you want everything, something would have to be compromised. So here, your magnification power is a little compromised, along with a little resolution. Now, how do you calculate the magnification? If you see you must have seen in a lot of your books, every time that you see a picture, below the picture, it is either written as X40, sometimes it's written as X500. So how do you see, what is this? This is the magnification at which you saw the structure. So for calculating the magnification of a light microscope, when you're talking about a light microscope, only the light is involved. There's no depth of the structure. There's no, magnification which is too high, and there's no, resolution which is too high, which means you can only see the cells maximum and a little of nucleus and a little, one or two, your, what do you call them, subcellular structures, which is your organelles. So you calculate the magnification of the eyepiece. Why do you calculate the eyepiece? Because eyepiece is also a lens, and so is objective lens. So you would have to calculate the total of it. If you calculate only objective lens, which is directly magnifying the stage or the sample that you're looking at, you would neglect the eyepiece, which is the upper part. And if you do that, you won't ever be able to understand how much the exact zooming or the magnification is. So you would have to, every eyepiece has its own magnification. Once you buy a microscope, with that microscope comes the maximum limit of the magnification for your eyepiece. So for say it is X4, so into 4. And the objective lens is zoomed at 10. So how do you calculate it? You multiply these both, it comes out as 40. So under the picture, whatever you're looking at, you would always have to write that it is under X40, which means it has been zoomed 40 times. Now, if you saw let's say, a cell which looked like this. You saw this cell, and now you need to see the actual, you need to, calculate the actual size of this cell. Because you're looking at it under the microscope, you won't ever be able to understand how small it is until you calculate the size. So to calculate the size, you would have to see the magnification, which you can find out from the last year formula. You can calculate objective lens and your magnifying lens together, eyepiece lens. Then you can, it is equal to the size of image divided by the size of real object. So for example, if the magnification of the microscope is given as X40 and the cell you observed under the microscope looks 1 mm, that is calculated because the stage can have scales. So you can, according to that scale, you can calculate the size. So the actual diameter of the cell is going to be, so let me write the diagram so that you can understand it. There is magnification, which is equal to size of the image divided by size of object. So magnification in the question is given as X40, so you take it as 40, which is equal to what is the size of the image that you observed? It is 1 mm. So you take 1 mm. Now I told you you can't ever, take the entire thing as mm. You would have to convert it into meters, and then this is the size of the object. So the size of object can go here, you cross multiply, it is going to come down. So it is going to be equal to 1 upon 40. This is mm. So if you calculate this, this is going to come out 0.025 mm. Now how do you see if you are having mm? Now millimeter is here, micrometer is another right to it. So micrometer, millimeter is 10 to the power minus 3. Micrometer is 10 to the power minus 6, which means if you need to go from millimeter to micrometer, you would have to jump 3 times right. So if you convert this, it is going to be, in micrometers, it is going to be 25 micrometer. How? You jump this point to 3 times, so it is going to be here. So you jump right 3 times, you're going to be a micro, so it is 25 micrometer. Now each one of you, one by one, turn on your mics and tell me if you understood the conversion.
I understood.
Okay. Okay. What about the others? Okay, so they're not replying. Okay, next is your magnification and the resolution power. So resolution power, microscopes are helpful in magnifying things. An average height of a person will look 3.5 kilometers by light microscope, and if you're looking at it under electron microscope, it is going to look at 3,500 kilometers. So this is how much the magnification can go on to. This is a normal cell, and this is how it looks like under a microscope. And yes, it does move when you look at it under the microscope until unless the cell is dead. For example, I remember watching a nymph. Do you guys know what a nymph is?
No.
It's a larval stage of fruit flies. So we had an experimental look at them under the microscope, and they were moving. So we would always have to change the focus field so that we can follow the path that it was following. And it looks beautiful. Next is how do you calculate, how you see the resolution power. So it is ability to distinguish between two separate points that affect the detail of a picture. Like I said, if the pixels are close enough, you'll be able to have a good picture. Resolution of a light microscope is only 200 nanometer, while the resolution of a scanning microscope, again scanning is the one which shows 3D images, is 10 nanometer. So the sizes have gone a little, the distance between them has gone a little farther. And resolution of a transmission electron microscope, which is the one that gives you 2D images, is only 0.2 nanometer. So this is the approximate distance between the two atoms of a solid surface, which is pretty much why you're able to see a very, very clear picture under a transmission electron microscope. The next point that we're going to talk about today is animal and plant cells. In this topic, we're going to cover what are the main animal type cells, which are the cells that are present in animals, then what are the similarities and the differences between them and different kind of plant cells. Every time that you talk about plant cells and animal cells, one thing that you need to remember is that plants cannot move. They can't even if they want to. Animals, on the other hand, have a capability of moving from one part of the room to the other, or they also have a capability of moving their hands, their eyes, their legs, neck, everything. So not only are we moving the parts of our body, but altogether body itself can travel. On the other hand, plants can't do either. They can't even move their leaves unless there's wind around, nor can they walk on their own. So if this is one thing that you always have in your head while trying to solve a question coming from plant and animal cells, I think it would make your understanding to the question easier. So this is how an animal cell looks like. An average animal cell is only 10 to 30 micrometer. Micro is again 10 to the power minus 6 meters. And there are 100,000 or 300,000 cells are supposed to be lined up to form a meter rule. So if you're measuring a meter, at least 100,000 or 300,000 cells will be lined up if you're talking about an animal cell, an average size. Although the size of the cell is always going to change according to what cell are we talking about. Now coming to the parts of your animal cell, the first one is the nucleus. We always talk about the nucleus first because if that's not there, there's no point of having a cell. I mean, there's no point of having a human body either. If you don't have DNA, you're not going to have anything in your body. Every protein that you have in your body is because of the DNA that is present in your body. So it controls the activity of a cell. Like your body has brain, your brain is going to control your body. Similarly, what a cell is supposed to do is always controlled by the nucleus that is present in the cell. and it is surrounded by a nuclear membrane. If you look at this, we're talking about a animal cell. Animal cell is the most advanced type of cells that is there. I mean, if you're talking about an animal cell, you're also talking about a human cell, and humans are the most advanced species on the planet. So the kind of organelles that human body has are the most advanced type. So they're going to have everything that is there. So this is only nucleus. This is not a cell. This is just a zoomed in nucleus part. So in the nucleus, the envelope or the boundary of the nucleus has a little pores, which is known as your nuclear pores, from where your, for say, the DNA has made up certain proteins, and they have to come out of the cell, come out of the nucleus, so they're going to travel from these pores. Then there is nuclear envelope, which is important. Why is it important? Because a lot of organisms are there on the planet which does not have a nuclear envelope. The nucleus also has a nucleus-like body, which is known as nucleolus. So you can say it's a nucleus of the nucleus. And then outside the boundaries of the nucleus is your ER, or your endoplasmic reticulum. The nucleus also contains the genes on the chromosome. Are you guys clear with the concept of what is chromosome, what is DNA, what is genes?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there are genes present in the chromosome that are going to carry all the instructions that are there for making the proteins to build a new cell. Building a new cell, what eye color you're supposed to have, your hair color, your body stature, what is going to be the body, proteins that is to be produced in your body. Even if you're, what kind of mood you're supposed to have, all is controlled by the certain genes that are present in the chromosome. So which is pretty much why nucleus is the most important part of a cell. The average diameter of a nucleus is approximately 10 micrometer. But that is going to vary according to the size of the cell. For say if the size of the cell itself is 10 micrometer, there's no point of having a nucleus which is 10 micrometer. The second part is the cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is the liquid gel in which your organelles are suspended. If there is no organelle suspended, it is not a cytoplasm. A cytoplasm is called a cytoplasm only when organelles are there in the cell. If you look at this cell, they're calling it cytoplasm because there are different organelles that are roaming in the cytoplasm. If that is not there, it is then called as protoplasm. If a cell does not have organelles, it just has the liquid part, then that liquid part is known as protoplasm. Most of the chemical reactions that are there are present in the chromosome. For say your respiration, half takes, this is your cell, this is your nucleus, and this is the mitochondria. So half of your reactions are going to be in the your cytoplasm, and half of that is going to be in the mitochondria. So most of reactions that are there in your body are going to be in the cytoplasm, because it's like the free space. If you guys want to play, you're going to play in the playground because that's the free space. In the cell, this is the only free space that is present. Then the next thing is the cell membrane. The cell is supposed to be bound in a structure. Otherwise, because the cytoplasm is the liquid, it is going to flow into the plasma of the body if there is no cell membrane. It controls the passage of the substances. For say the cell needs certain protein. That protein would have to cross the cell membrane, such as there are glucoses, there are mineral ions that are supposed to be there in the cell that the cell needs, and for that they would always have to cross the cell membrane. It also controls the movement of the substances such as urea, hormones out of the cell. Now, if you think about oxygen, it is supposed to move inside the cell. If you're talking about glucose, it is also supposed to move inside the cell. Cell is the most greedy about these two things. These are the two things that cell can engulf as much as you give it to the cell. Cell will never say no to these two things, which is your oxygen and your glucose. These are supposed to go in. If you're talking about what has to come outside the cell, first is your carbon dioxide, which is going to counterpart your oxygen in the body. If glucose is used up, there is urea production that is going to come out of the cell. Otherwise, these are the major that is going to come out. Otherwise, sometimes there are also certain hormones These hormones are inside the cell and they have to go outside the cell. For example, your body has produced a certain hormone in a structure like your adrenal gland or your pituitary gland. Those cells are going to produce that hormone, and that hormone would then have to move out of that part of the body so that they can reach the different parts of the body. For example, pituitary gland majorly release all the hormones that are related to your sex hormones. All those sex hormones are released in the pituitary. From the pituitary, then they enter the bloodstream. Once they enter the bloodstream, then your sexual reproduction, which is your gamete formation, major point of that. So that your gamete formation starts only when the level of those hormones rise up in your blood. The next very important part is your mitochondria. Mitochondria, like I said, half of the respiration takes place in the cytoplasm, other half takes place in the mitochondria. So anaerobic respiration is going to take place in the mitochondria. It is the part which is going to give you ATPs. So let me draw the cell again. So this is your cell. This is where the mitochondria is. You took oxygen from the outside. This oxygen is not needed when the breakdown of glucose is taking place in the cell. When it is breaking down in the cytoplasm, there is no oxygen needed. Oxygen is needed when the mitochondrial breakdown has to take place. For say there is, because we're not talking about respiration, for say there's an XYZ component that was formed after breakdown of glucose. That XYZ is going to move into the mitochondria, then it breaks down, and that is when this oxygen is used. And as a result, mitochondria is going to give you ATPs, which is the exact reason why your mitochondria is known as the powerhouse of the cell, because it generates ATPs or your energy every time your glucose is broken down into the cell. So it is used for releasing energy in the cell. It is very, very small in size. One thing that you have to notice about the mitochondria is that it has its own DNA. This is one thing that separates mitochondria from other kind of organelles, because no other organelle has systems for breakdown, or first is no other organelle is capable of producing amount of ATPs that this organelle is. Second is not every other organelle has its own DNA, while mitochondria does. Talking about ribosomes. Now, like I said, your body has DNA, and those DNA is converted into proteins in your body, and everything that is there in your body that is expressed is in the protein form. Ribosome is the site where your protein synthesis is going to take place. All the necessary proteins that are there in your body are produced in the ribosomes. This is one part. Second is that you would have to still take proteins from the outside environment, for example, in your diet. Why? Because these are the proteins that are expressed in the body. They're deciding different kind of things for your body. For example, your mood, eye color, hair color, and different kind of things. The protein that you take from the outside is the energy source, is the one that is going to let mitochondria break it down and then produce energy for you. Then the next part is your plant cell. Plant cell is a different form of cells, and it is different from animal cells. They make their own food, which is like the first thing that should come to your head, because we guys can move, humans can move, and we're able to have our own food. On the other hand, plant can't move. Plant can't go from one place to the other to get its food, so it produces its own. And their body is incapable of moving from one place to the other. The size of the plant cell is bigger than that of animal cells, because animals have a larger body and a lot of functions to perform. On the other hand, plants can have a smaller body and lesser amount of functions to perform. So they are bigger in size. That is at least 10 to 100 micrometer. In animal, it was from 10 to 30 micrometer. Now it is 100. The range has increased. Coming to the features that are present in the plant cell. If you talk about the features in the plant cell, there are certain different kind of organisms which also follow the same kind of cells. Plant cells have all the features that are present in the animal cell. In the animal cell, we talked about nucleus. Then we talked about your cell membrane. We also talked about your cytoplasm, we talked about mitochondria, and we talked about ribosomes. So these are the things that we talked about in animal cell. All these structures are present in the plant cell. Except these, there are also different other kind of organelles that will be present in the animal cell. Why? Because there are different functions of those organelles. For example, chloroplast. I think you all know what a chloroplast is. Chloroplast is not present in animals because we do not need to perform photosynthesis. On the other hand, plants do. So if plant has to perform photosynthesis, it needs to have your chloroplast or your chlorophyll present in the cell. This is what a plant cell looks like. The major volume of the plant cell is consumed by a structure which is known as a vacuole or a permanent vacuole. Cytoplasm is on the edges, on the outer side, because vacuole is empty. Then there is nucleus, cell membrane. Covering the cell membrane, there is cell wall. Then there is mitochondria because it needs energy, and then there is chloroplast. Talking about the other organisms which have similar kind of structures as plant cells have, there's algae. Algae, when you do not use your swimming pool for a long time, the floor of the swimming pool gets slippery. It's because of the presence of algae. Algae can be grown everywhere where there's sunlight, there's enough water present. These are the places where algae can grow easily. So that is why your floors of swimming pool has slippery surfaces. That is pretty much why we would have to change the water of the swimming pool every once in a while so that there's no algae formation or algae sprouting on your floor. Algae are the aquatic organisms that are capable of performing photosynthesis. Now, because algae is capable of performing photosynthesis, it's the exact same reason why algae has a cell which is similar to your plant cell. These have very similar structures to that of a plant cell. This is how an algae looks like under microscope. Earlier, they were classified under plants. Earlier, before we had a 5-kingdom classification. Right now, if we talk about your theories, we have 5 kingdoms. In those 5 kingdoms, algae has a different place. Initially, it was clumped up with your plants. Now, it is kept under a different kingdom, which is your kingdom Protista. Although some algae are still under plant kingdom, but majors are under protistans. Talking about plant cells and algae, now we're going to talk about both of these because they have the same structure. They're going to have a cell wall which is composed of cellulose, and that strengthens the cell and give it support. Cell has to stay outside in the environment all day, irrespective of how sunny it is, irrespective of how much it's raining outside, the plant has to stay outside. So it would have to have a wall-like structure so that it does not go flaccid every time something happens. For example, if it's too much raining, that doesn't mean the plant would go flaccid. Flaccid means it goes down. So flaccid is not there because the plant has rigid cell walls present. Then there is chloroplast. There are 3 to 5 micrometer long in the structure. Every part of the plant which is green in structure is having chloroplast, irrespective of if it's the structure. If you look at the flower, at the base of the flower you have green structures present. Those green structures are known as sepals, and even those have chloroplast present in them because they're green in color. So everything on the plant which is green in color is supposed to have chloroplast. The color is so because of the presence of chlorophyll. So chloroplast has chlorophyll. Then chlorophyll absorbs the light, so the plant can make food by photosynthesis. On the other hand, roots are brown in color, so they're not going to have any chlorophyll. Hence, they are not going to perform photosynthesis. One reason for that is because they're underground. They're not in exposure to sunlight. And for photosynthesis, you obviously need sunlight. So if there's no sunlight, there's not going to be any chlorophyll required in that part of the plant. Coming to the permanent vacuole, like I said, the major volume of the plant cell is under the structure which is your floating body like this or this. This is your permanent vacuole. It is the space in cytoplasm which is filled with cell sap, which is an empty space, important for keeping the plant rigid to support the plant. Think of one thing. This is the plant stem. It has to stay upright. For this to stay upright, the cell would have to be rigid. And for cells to be rigid, they need to have enough volume. For say your balloons, you fill a balloon to the max, to its limit, so that you can't press it. Although if you press it too hard, it's going to burst. But you have a stage where the structure of the balloon has enough air into it so that you can't press it. That is how a plant cell is. It is filled with everything. Even the cytoplasm is packed with all the organelles, and the vacuole is packed with water. So it's a very, very strong solid structure, so that the plant do not go any flaccid, so that the plant stays rigid and it stays upright. Is that clear? Are these two topics clear to all of you?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Great. Now talking about the third topic, which is your eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. We're going to talk about the same things that we talked about in plant cells and animal cells. First, what are the similarities and differences between an eukaryotic and a prokaryotic plant, and how bacterial cell comes into place, because plant cells and animal cells are different. Bacterial cell is a completely different genre of cells. So we need to know what are the differences, and for that we need to understand prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Then at last we're going to talk about the cells, your size of the cell, and what is the scale to understand the order of magnitude. It's an important part for your exam point of view. Coming to eukaryotic cells, when you're talking about eukaryotic cells, imagine every plant and animal cell together. So, example, all plant and animal cells all together are your eukaryotic cells. They have cell membrane, they have cytoplasm, they also have genetic material, which is in your nucleus. And in the plant cells and animal cells, we talked about nucleus having an envelope. So that is also going to be there. And the genetic material is a chemical which is known as DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid. They form a structure which is known as chromosomes, so that they can be packed into the nucleus. All animal cells, plant cells, all fungi and protistans, all of these cells are eukaryotic in nature. Eukaryotic, the word, if I break down the word, there is eu and there's char. Every time the word char comes in, you hear it in biology, the first thing that should come to your head is the structure, which is nucleus. Eu, on the other hand, is talking about your advanced. So there's going to be an advanced nucleus. If you do not remember it like an advanced, you can remember U is for the word new. So it is going to have a new nucleus. And the new nucleus is packed under nuclear envelope. On the other hand, if I talk about prokaryotic, let's break the word again. Pro is for the word primitive. And char again is for the word nucleus. So it is going to have a primitive nucleus. So the primitive nucleus is not going to have any kind of cell, your nuclear envelope or nuclear wall against outside it. For example, bacteria. All the kinds of bacteria that you know comes under prokaryotic cells. These are very, very small in size, only 0.2 to 0.2 micrometer, and 1 to 2 order of magnitude smaller than eukaryotic cells. 1 to 2 order of magnitude means either 10 times smaller or 100 times smaller than eukaryotic cells. One can fit thousands of those in a full stop. The full stop that you put after your sentence ends can have thousands of your prokaryotic cells into that one small space. You need a powerful microscope to watch an individual bacteria, but can watch them in the culture in labs. There's an experiment that we're going to talk about. There's a practical that you guys need to understand. It's about how to culture a bacteria in a lab. In that, what we do is we take a petri dish. It's like a glass a dish, and in that dish we lay out a nutritive medium. That nutritive medium is for one thing, so that the bacteria can have food. Because if bacteria has food, it is easier for the bacteria to grow. Once that is there, we lay certain bacteria, and those bacteria start growing. So what happens is, if you look at the petri dish, it looks circular like this, And they're going to be spots like this. They're going to have spots like these, and each of these spot is going to have bacteria. But that does not mean it's going to have one bacteria. They're going to be billions of it. Billions of it in one point. Then you can calculate, but the practical is something that we're going to talk about in further classes. Then talking about bacteria has cytoplasm. It has a cell membrane. Now bacteria has a strong cell membrane. It also has cell wall. Bacteria has a very, very strong cell membrane. If you look at the yellow part in the membrane, it is the thickest because they really have a very, very nice, nicely made cell wall. Every time that I think about bacteria, I think about those squishy balls that have, they have outgrowths like these. In the market, you get balls which have, tentacles like these, and it's a squishy ball, and you throw it on the wall and it sticks to the wall. That is how I imagine bacteria, because that's the best thing that can express a bacteria. It is sticky, so it's able to stick to the walls. At the same time, it is very, very strong, which is pretty much why you throw it and it doesn't break. So it's a very, very thick cell wall, and it is well protected. The cell wall is not made up of cellulose. So the cell wall is made up of a different kind of material. Now if you look at the diagram here, the diagram shows three walls. There's blue, there's yellow, and there's red. There are three walls present, which is why I said it's a very, very strong structure. It does not break at all in an easy environment. For example, there are bacteria which are known as archaebacteria, and these bacteria are present in volcano structures. They are capable of being present in hot water springs and your acidic environments. Complete acidic lakes are there on the planet, and those places can even have bacterial growths. So they have a very, very strong cell wall for survival skills. The genetic material is not enclosed in the nuclear membrane, which is pretty much why they have a name which is known as prokaryotic, which is pro means primitive, char means nucleus. Chromosome is a single DNA which is in a loop structure, and it floats free in the cytoplasm, this red structure. This is an entire loop, although it is not looking like a loop because it's too long to have a stiff circular structure. There's another extra small ring of DNA which is known as plasmid. This is what a plasmid looks like. Bacteria do not have sexual reproduction, but they do have a capability of transferring plasmid from one bacteria to the other. They have this structure, this tail. This tail can embed into the adjacent bacteria, and the plasmid can go to the other bacteria. So which is pretty much why bacteria are very, very strong in the environment, because they also have a little variation in themselves. Plasmid codes for specific features such as antibiotic resistant. So imagine if it is having resistance to antibiotics. If this bacteria cause infection to me, and even if I take antibiotics, this bacteria is resistant to it because it has a plasmid for that resistance. So irrespective of how much antibiotics I take, it is not going to work on the bacteria, which is why bacteria are present everywhere. There's another word used for bacteria which is omnipresent. Omnipresent means they're present absolutely anywhere and everywhere. Every place that you can see right in front of your eyes, irrespective of if it's your laptop, your phone, your table, your pen, everything has bacteria. So they are omnipresent. Some bacteria have a protective slimy capsule, which is this blue one, the one that has tentacle-like structures coming out of it. These tentacle-like structures are called as fimbriae, but at the same time, you do not need to go into details right now. So this structure, the slimy capsule, is present outside the cell wall, which is why I said you throw it on the wall and it sticks, because it's sticky. It's a slime thing, so it sticks on the wall. Some types of bacteria, not all, are going to have a flagellum. Flagellum is a singular word if you call it as a plural word. For example, if the same bacteria had another flagella coming like this, then these together will be called as flagella. If you're talking about one, you're going to call it as flagellum, which is a long protein strand that lashes out. This helps them move. So it whips like this and they move forward. Flagella helps in locomotion. Like I said, they're going to whip around, and as they whip, they're going to move in the environment. Although flagella is mostly present in organisms which have aquatic environment or habitat, because flagella is like the tail. Fishes have tails so that they can whip their tail and they can move forward. Similar thing happens with prokaryotic organisms, or every organism that is capable of having a flagella. Then coming to some bacteria are useful while some are harmful. I have cold, so it might be bacteria, but it's majorly a cold, virus. So all these organisms, major microorganisms, are capable of causing infections to humans. They are capable of causing diseases in humans, other animals, and even plants. A lot of plants have different kind of bacterial infections. You must have seen plants with a lot of different kind of leaves. Some have leaves like, if this is the leaf is going to have patches of your yellow and green. Some leaves have pimple-like structures on them. Those are also because of different kind of pathogens. So a lot of plant diseases are there, although we do not see plant diseases very commonly because we do not study plants in our normal life. If you're going through a garden, you do not exactly focus on the leaves of the plant, you more focus on the flowers. So, but there are a lot of diseases that are there in your plants. They can also destroy and decompose your food. Every time that your food starts stinking, it is either because of fungus or bacterial growth. Now coming to a very, very important topic, it's the order of magnitude. These are used to make an approximate comparison between numbers and objects. We're talking about a size. Now, I need to always have a reference. For example, if your friends ask you your height, right? You tell them your height because you know. But at the same time, if they say what's the other person's height, you're going to say he's like a foot, shorter than me, or she's a foot taller than me, or whatever. So you take a reference of your own height. Here, because we're talking about a lot of organisms, there are like billions of organisms present on the planet, we need to have certain amount of reference between them. Although we do not have a standard in biology as of yet, we do not standardize the size. We never say that it is this much, bigger than a bacteria. We do not use words like that. But if we are talking about two cells, we do compare them in one way or the other. So, if one number is 10 times bigger than the other, it is bigger in order of magnitude. So which means if one cell is this much small, which is like the fingertip, and other one is this, it's almost like the 10 times. So we are going to say this has a order of magnitude of 1, which means 10. So it is always shown in the power of 10. So you say power of 10, 1, 10 to the power 2, 10 to the power 3. So this is how you calculate the order of magnitude. If it is 10 times bigger, you say magnitude of order of magnitude is 1, which is 10 to the power 1. If it's 100 times bigger, you're going to say 10 to the power 2, which means order of magnitude is 2. So like that, you can compare. There's a scale below here so that you can see what is the different order of cells. So the smallest one is an atom, which is a hydrogen atom because it has only one electron. Then you move on. If you're talking about a cell, proteins are very, very small, but the smallest cell that we have is a virus, which is although viruses are neither living nor dead, so we do not really count viruses as living organisms, but HIV virus is smaller than bacteria. From bacteria, there is living organisms. Bacteria is the smallest living organism that we know of. You have two numbers to compare. Like I said, you have two cells to compare. How are you going to compare them? You always divide the bigger number with the smaller one. If they, divide and whatever it is coming, it is less than 10. For example, you take 10 divided by 5. It comes out as 2. It is smaller than 10. Then this order of magnitude is same. Even if the answer came as 2, you're still going to say the order of magnitude is same, because 10 is still a bigger number. Everything below 10 is considered as nil. So if you have a cell which is 10 in size, the other one is 5 in size, it comes out as 2, you're going to say the order of magnitude is same. The next thing is if the bigger number divides the smaller number and the number comes out as 10 or around 10, if approximate comes out as 10. For example, it is 9.89. So it approximate comes out as 10. So that also is considered as an order of magnitude. So you say it's an order of magnitude, which means 10 to the power 1. The same thing happens if the order of magnitude is around 100, then if the division comes out as 100 or around 100, you say the order of magnitude is 2, which is 2 order of magnitude, 10 to the power 2. So this is how you can calculate the order of magnitude. It is very, very helpful when you're trying to compare two different kind of cells. Now there's an example I would like you guys to solve. So each one of you can start solving this, then we can discuss the answer together. Shall I read the question? A small animal cell has a length of around 10 micrometer. The larger plant cell has a length of 100 micrometer. What is the order of magnitude? It's an
One order of magnitude bigger.
yeah. What about the others? Did your answer come out as the same?
I got it.
Yeah, so it's divided 100 divided by 10, and that comes out 10, and because it's 10, an order of magnitude is going to be there. So the large plant cell is an order of magnitude or 10 to the power 1 time bigger than the small animal cell. So this is how you write it. So I think that is where I would like to wrap up my class today. Did you guys understand everything? Do you guys have any question? Each one of you?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I understood. I don't have any questions. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Will we be taking any notes?
What?
Will we be taking any notes?
You're
Of the presentation?
Yeah, you're speaking too low. Can you speak a little louder?
Will we get a copy of the presentation?
Yeah, you're going to get this presentation, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to have everything that I've written though, but you're going to get the presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other thing? Anybody of you? No? Bye-bye, take care.